The battle belongs to the Lord. Have you ever noticed that sometimes what you want, the desires that you have, can get in the way of hearing another person? Have you ever noticed that? Let me give you a little example. Okay, check this out. This is my hammer, all right? I don't know, maybe you guys want to zoom in on that bad boy. That is a serious hammer right there. It came from one of those little, home kits. The ones that cost like $20 and you get 20 tools. So that's about a $1 hammer right there. My son is in construction now, my oldest son, and he thinks it is ridiculous that I call this a hammer because he uses a hammer that, I don't know, it's like 4 feet long or something like that. But this hammer is great for our purposes today. And what I'm going to use, this hammer is going to illustrate my own efforts. Fixing stuff, getting stuff done, my own plans, my own attempts to build things in my life, my desires and my wants, and my attempts to achieve them. Now, so here's what happened to me one day recently. I was actually trying to fix something. So this is a very small example to show you how what you want sometimes gets in the way of hearing another person. I was trying to fix something. It was actually a piece of physical equipment that we have here at the church. And it was bent. And so I was trying to bend it back in shape and fix it up. And I thought, I was wandering around the church, and I thought I'd go in and sit in the same room as one of my coworkers while I was doing it. So I sat down, and I don't know if you are like this, but when I am focused on something, I am all in. I am very focused on it. My mind was gripped by my desire to, which was a good desire, to fix this piece of equipment that I had in front of me. And so I'm fixing it, I'm chit-chatting with my coworker. And all of a sudden, my coworker starts telling me some really important things. Really important things that I should have been listening to, and guess what I was doing? And this went on for a while, and I started to know in my brain, you know what? You're not really listening to this person. But I couldn't let go of my hammer. I didn't really have a hammer in my hand. But I couldn't let go of the thing that I was fixed on in that moment. And so finally, I got up, I left at one point, and then I came back, and I realized that this person actually felt really kind of hurt by me because they were trying to share something important, and I wasn't even listening at all. So I had to take all of my stuff that I had in front of me, and I had to go, you know what? I'm putting this away, and I'm pushing it aside on this table. It is now out of my way, out of my sight. And even then, it took me a few minutes before I could really get myself into a state where I could hear what this other person was saying. Now, my ears could hear them the whole time, but I wasn't really listening. What you want, your own desires, your own plans, your own hammer, can get in the way of hearing another person. Now, here's the thing. God is a person. And just like what I want can get in the way of hearing another human being, what I want, my desires, my plans, can get in the way of hearing what God is trying to say to me. We're going to see that happen today in the section that we're in Daniel. So welcome back if you've been here with us during this series of messages. Welcome if you're coming for the first time. We are in a series of messages right now called Not Home Yet. And we're looking at 3 different books during this series. It's going to be a long series. We'll be changing books soon, actually. We'll be going back and forth between the Old Testament book of Daniel, where we've been for a while and where we'll be today, and the New Testament book of 1st and 2nd Peter. There's lots of similarities between those 2 books. We'll be changing that up soon. What we're doing in this series, we are studying. We are learning to never give up, and we're going to be learning about the end of the world. We're studying deep. There's a lot of history in this series because of the book of Daniel. We're also learning how to study the Bible ourselves. So as you listen to this message, previous ones, future ones, I want you to be thinking about how can I apply some of the things that I just saw when I am reading the Bible on my own at home. Of course, that assumes that you are reading the Bible on your own at home. Do that. There's nothing else like it. That's going to help you so much. So we're learning how to study. Never give up. Daniel and Peter both lived through times where they were waiting and waiting for something that God had promised to do. We are also living in a time of waiting. And it seems so long, doesn't it? You know how long Daniel waited? 70 years. And then the rest of his life. And he never saw the thing that God had promised. He never saw it in this life. Why? Because this is not our real home. We're not home yet. So even if some of the stuff we're waiting for never comes in this life, that's okay. We're going to trust God. We're going to learn how to do that, okay? Never giving up. All right, so today's message, we are going to be looking at Four in the Fire. This is an exciting story. We are going to be looking at these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you grew up in church, you can probably rattle off those very bizarre names, very unusual names to us. You can probably rattle them off just like the names of your siblings, right? Let's hear you do it at home. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yes, very famous story. If you are joining for the first time and you didn't grow up in church like me, you're probably like, what in the world are you talking about? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, well, we're going to talk about their story today as they trusted God in the face of death. Now, what we're going to do, we'll remember where we're at in this book of Daniel and what we've seen so far in the book of Daniel. Part of what we've seen is two ways of living. Remember, it's sort of like there's two characters in the book of Daniel. There's the king Nebuchadnezzar, another unusual name, but very famous historical figure, King Nebuchadnezzar II of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, who started his reign in 605 BC. He is a central figure in this story. And we've seen his way of life is all about going after what he wants. Okay, so his way of life could be represented by, I'm going to get it done. What I want, my plans, I'm going to accomplish them with my strength. And you remember when we looked at his throne speech, right? When he ascended the throne in 605 BC, and he said, "Oh, great gods, give me all the awesome stuff forever." That's his plan. That's what he wants. He wants to be the king of the world, have all the awesome stuff in his palace, in his kingdom forever. He wants to somehow establish that forever. But Nebuchadnezzar's way of life is empty, and it's actually insecure. It looks like he's got everything under control. He literally is the king of the world at this time. There is no one who can defeat him. And yet, he's terrified deep down. We've been seeing for the last 3 weeks. He is terrified, number one, that his entire religion is a lie. He's terrified that that's true, and it actually is true. And he's also terrified that everything he and his dad have built is going to come crashing down, and it's going to come crashing down. He's terrified of those two things. So he looks like he has everything. This is the first way of life. Looks like he has everything, human strength, power, but deep down he's terrified and insecure because he knows it can't last. The other way of life is represented most of the time by Daniel. Today it's going to be represented by his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this way of life is, I'm not going after what I want. I'm going to serve God with my life. Because nothing else is secure. Nothing else has any hope. And this way of life, the Bible describes as light, God's wonderful light. It describes the other way of life as darkness, because that's what they really are. And we're going to see how these three today, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even though they have no human power, or very little, in the situation they're in, they have none. It looks like the whole world is against them, and they, on the outside, everything's terrible. On the inside, they are unafraid. They're 100% confident. They're not worried about anything. Would you like to be like that? Would you like to be like that? That's the life that God is offering to us. So that's the second way of life. So we're going to look at Nebuchadnezzar first, again today, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their way of life. And then we'll look at God himself in this situation and some of the things that God promises us if we live our lives for him, not for ourselves. If we take the hammer and set it aside, or we choose to use the hammer to serve him instead of to build our own plans and dreams. God makes some promises to us. God, who created the universe, makes promises to us if we will do that. Okay, so where are we at in the story? Last week, Nebuchadnezzar, the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about Nebuchadnezzar, super insecure. He had all these bad dreams. God was giving him great mercy by giving him these dreams. You remember? He saw this huge statue in his dream. And the head of the statue was gold. And the arms and the chest were silver. And the thighs were bronze. And the feet, the lower legs and the feet were mixed, iron and clay. They were mixed. And then in the dream, he saw a rock being cut out of a mountain. A relatively small rock. But listen, the rock was not cut out with human tools. That's important. The rock was not cut out by human hands or human power. And the rock comes and hits the statue on its feet, and the whole statue crumbles. But not only that, it crumbles into dust. Dust that's so fine that the wind comes and blows it away. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar was like, he's freaking out. What am I going to do about this dream? He says, somebody interpret this for me, but tell me what the dream is to prove that you are actually from God, that you have power to interpret it. Tell me what my dream was. None of his own priests can do it. And we saw that Daniel, trusting in his God, after an all-night prayer meeting with his friends, Daniel was given a vision from God. He said, this is what Nebuchadnezzar's dream means. And we watched last week, Daniel came in and boldly told Nebuchadnezzar, here's what your dream means. It meant that his kingdom was eventually going to be destroyed. Okay? The head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Then a different kingdom would come after him. Then a third one. Then a fourth. And then in the time of the fourth kingdom, God himself would set up a new kingdom that would destroy all the others. Nebuchadnezzar, get this, Nebuchadnezzar was given a prophetic dream about Jesus. Think about that for a minute. This pagan king who worships idols 600 years before Jesus is born is given a prophetic dream about Jesus. God is always speaking, and not only to people who know him. God is speaking to you. He's probably spoken to you many times in your life. He's probably spoken to you many times today. Can you hear him? Now here's the thing. Could Nebuchadnezzar hear him? So here's what Nebuchadnezzar does. He hears Daniel tell him his dream. He's stunned. He hears Daniel tell him the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the world, falls down prostrate in front of Daniel. Do you know what that means? Now, I can't do it because I'd be off camera all of a sudden. He goes down on his knees and then face down on the ground in front of Daniel, this 16-year-old kid. 16-year-old foreigner. And he says in that moment, imagine, what did Daniel feel like in this moment? The king of the world is bowing down at my feet. Okay. What Daniel did in his heart, we know, is he turned it back to God. Praise be to God. You need to worship God, not me. But here's what Nebuchadnezzar said in that moment. Nebuchadnezzar said what God has been trying to get him to understand throughout his whole life so far. Nebuchadnezzar said, Daniel, your God is the God of gods. Okay, your God is the God of gods. What does that mean? It means your God is the real God. Your God is above all the other gods that we worship. Okay, that's one thing. And then he said, your God is the Lord of lords, the King of kings. What does that mean? It means this. It's Nebuchadnezzar admitting, I'm not really the king of the world. Really, your God, Daniel, is the one who is the king of the whole world. He's the king even over me. Now, here's the thing. Nebuchadnezzar does that, and then he immediately goes away and forgets about it. The Bible talks about this. It describes that this is a tendency for human beings. We hear something from God. We see something in God's word, and we're like, yes, that explains life. That's what I want to live for. And then we get hungry and we go eat. Or then we get distracted by the TV. Or then we go hang out with our friends, and life happens, and we forget what we just heard, this deep, important message from God that should change us forever. We just forget it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar didn't forget it entirely, but he missed what it meant. It got twisted in his mind. Okay, so let's read our first section of Scripture from Daniel 3 today, and I'll show you what I mean. Now this starts, bring that up, so this starts, we don't know how much later this is. This might be 10 years later. This might be 20 years later. This might be the next year. We're not actually sure. But here's what happens next. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Now, an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, what had he just seen in his dream? A giant statue and image. And what was the head of it made out of? Gold. What do we see him doing here? In some way, he's recreating his dream in real life. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the other provincial officials. That's a lot of people. This was a massive empire. To come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Now I know it said 60 cubits. It's 90 feet high. It's 30 meters tall. This is a massive statue. And they stood before it, and the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of my massive band," okay, here's what's in his band. Pastor Jason would love to have a band with this many instruments. He loves big band. The horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music. We can't even list all the kinds of music that were in this band. We'll just list the most important ones. As soon as you hear the sound of that band, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Notice that was in quotes there. So it's in quotes because that's actually part of the royal decree that went out. Could you imagine this? What a different time they lived in. The world was actually much harsher in some ways then than it is now. You know, I mean, the punishment is to be thrown alive into a blazing fire. And that's written in the royal decree. Imagine government of British Columbia coming to you on CTV News, you know, an advertisement. You'd better follow our rules or you'll be thrown into a blazing fire. I mean, that's what's happening here. This is the official royal proclamation. It's a different world. So therefore, because this proclamation went out, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. No kidding, they did, because they were going to be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, we need to pause there, and let's talk about what is Nebuchadnezzar doing here. So notice, I said as we read through it, that he is recreating his dream in some way. So Nebuchadnezzar does remember some things about that incident that he's had with Daniel. And he remembers them for a long time, long enough to build a 90-foot high statue and overlay the whole thing with gold. Now, people have noted that it's probably not solid gold because that much gold probably didn't exist in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, actually. It's probably gilded, so just gold on the surface, but that's okay. It's still an immense amount of gold. So he's rebuilding the statue in some way. We don't know. Let's bring up the picture of that, the previous picture of the statue of Nebo. So I put this up last week. This is an actual statue, a small one, from a Babylonian temple in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And this is, as I said last week, this is an image of the god Nabu, or Nebu, who Nebuchadnezzar is named after. The Neba in his name comes from this god. And so this is maybe the best guess at what kind of thing Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream and what kind of thing he's created here. So it never actually says that it's a statue of a human being. It doesn't say that. In the dream, the statue had a head and arms and legs, so probably a human. It seems like it's standing upright. And so this is our best guess, but we don't actually know. Next image, this is sort of the classic Sunday school. If you grew up in Sunday school with stories and pictures about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, give me a woo woo. Sunday school people, yes. I didn't, but here I've seen a lot of these. This is a classic Sunday school style image of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is what they're going to do in a minute, is they're not going to bow down, right? So you see everybody bowing down here. You see the 90-foot high statue of gold. Actually, it doesn't look big enough in this picture, does it? Maybe it's far away. But that's sort of the classic image. But leave it on that one for a minute. So we see what's the same about the dream. Nebuchadnezzar thinks, okay, I've heard from God or from the gods. I've heard from the gods. I know that I have. Maybe he thinks they're asking me to do something. So I saw this statue in my dream. Maybe they're asking me to build this statue that I saw in my dream. Now, if you remember the interpretation of the dream, if you just looked at that objectively, there's no way you could get that out of the dream. The dream was about how all the kingdoms of human beings are eventually going to be destroyed. All human work, ultimately it's God's work that will stand, not human work. And so the fact that Nebuchadnezzar eventually walks away thinking, the gods are asking me to build a statue. They're asking me to do great work. Notice he's twisting what he's heard from God, and he's actually twisting it into the shape of what he wants. What does Nebuchadnezzar want? He wants to have all the awesome stuff forever. He wants to be the great one forever. You'll notice that one other difference about this statue from the statue in the dream. It's a huge difference. What is it? Yeah, the statue is entirely gold. The statue in the dream showed a succession of kingdoms, didn't it? The statue that he builds is entirely gold. What did the gold part of the statue in the dream represent? It represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. He has remade the statue, but he's remade it so now the whole thing is just him. This statue, if we want to think about what it is in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, it's maybe they want me to give them this offering, this statue that's all gold so that my kingdom can last forever. And we won't have to have a succession of kingdoms, and God won't have to come and bring his kingdom and destroy all the human ones. I'll just turn my kingdom a little bit more, make it a little bit more what God is asking me, and then my kingdom can last forever. Do you see it? Nebuchadnezzar, what he wants, his desires and his dreams are firmly in the way of him understanding what God is telling him. God has told him very clearly, you're not in charge, Nebuchadnezzar. It's not about you. And all he can see is me, me, me. It's all about me. I hear God saying something about a statue, but I know it must be about me because that's what I want. I know it must be about my dream and what I'm building, because that's all I can see. Nebuchadnezzar cannot hear God because his own desires are in the way. This is important for us because it also happens to us all the time. So here's the first point to write down for today is this. Do you want to hear God? Do you really? That's a question. So I'm not just assuming that you do. Now, you probably think you do, but it's a question you must consider. Do you really want to hear what God is calling you to do and to become? If you want to, get your own desires out of the way. Nebuchadnezzar cannot hear God properly. He's twisted it because his own desires are firmly in the way. And this happens to human beings all the time. We must constantly fight against this. If you really want to hear God, get what you want out of the way. If you live your life, that's the two ways of life. You see it? Nebuchadnezzar's living for his own stuff, and that life, really, it's darkness. It is insecure. It will not last. If you live your life for God and only for him, just like I took that stuff, okay, that was a small example. I took that stuff that I was focused on and I physically pushed it out of my way because I needed to focus on what this other person was saying to me. If we will do that, with our deepest desires. What are the things that you really, really want in your life? You've got to lay it down. God might give some of that stuff back to you, but it can't be the main thing you're going after. You got to take it and push it aside so that you can hear what God is really calling you to. It's powerful. Let's look at the second section for our message today then. We looked at Nebuchadnezzar, his insecure way of life. Now let's look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These guys are so fun. Don't you love these guys? Oh man, they're so fun. Okay, here we go. So starting at verse 8. At this time, some astrologers. Oh, let me say one little detail here. A lot of people might wonder, where in the world is Daniel at? Where is Daniel? You got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, Daniel's kind of the leader of their little small group here, right? Daniel, he doesn't seem to be there. Now, there's lots of theories on this, but here's what I think, okay? When you notice before about who is called to come and worship at the foot of the statue, everyone that's listed in those earlier verses, in chapter 3, verses 1 to 7, everyone that's listed to come and bow down are some level of government official. They are the administrators of the province of Babylon, which is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were. It's not what Daniel was. Daniel was actually part of this other group, which are called magicians, astrologers, enchanters. That's usually the names in Daniel. It basically means the priestly class, the ones who are in charge of listening to the gods and telling the king, giving the king advice on what to do based on what they're hearing from the gods. So what I think is happening here, I think probably Daniel is there. But Daniel is not actually required to bow down. This priestly class, you'll see the astrologers are now mentioned, and they are sort of up with the king overseeing this whole process of bowing down to the idol and worshiping it. Now, that might not be the case. It might be that Daniel is away on a trip or something else. There's lots of theories about this. But what I think is that he's up with the astrologers. He's part of this priestly class. But the problem is Daniel's by himself. And at this point, it's probably a number of years since this great moment with King Nebuchadnezzar, and he doesn't have enough pull at this point to get his friends out of the situation. So we see now some of the priests, not Daniel, but his buddies up there, his co-workers, if you will. They come down and they denounce Daniel's friends. So at this time, some of the astrologers, they come forward and they denounce the Jews, meaning Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty," remember that's what he wants to live forever. "Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, some foreigners, you hear the tone here. There are some foreigners, some Jews, whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. You put them in charge of some of our other officials, King Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they pay no attention to your greatness, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar flies into a rage. You can see how gripped he is by this idea. He is going to preserve his kingdom. There's probably also an element here of if everybody will worship the same God, then his kingdom will be able to go on forever. He's trying to unite all of his leaders around the worship of this one God that is essentially him. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is this true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up?" He gives them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and pipe, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I've made, great. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Do you guys understand? I am not joking. And he wasn't. They already knew he wasn't joking. They had seen him kill lots of people. This was regular practice for this guy. Then what God, he says, will be able to rescue you from my hand? Notice how far he has fallen from that moment with Daniel years before. Your God, Daniel, is the God of gods and the Lord of lords. What God can rescue you from my hand? What God could defeat this hammer? He thinks his hammer is like 12 feet tall. His hammer's dinkier than this. He doesn't know it. It's just a little dollar hammer from Home Depot. It's even less than that in God's sight, but he thinks it's this amazing weapon. No God could defeat him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar. And I think this is the tone that they reply in. They are very calm, and they're totally free. Remember at the start I said, wouldn't you like to be that kind of a person who, in a situation where it looks utterly hopeless, you are completely secure. You're unafraid. You're calm. You're at peace. King Nebuchadnezzar, they say, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. We've done everything right, and you already knew that we didn't worship your gods. You've known it for a long time. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. What you're saying, Nebuchadnezzar, is ridiculous. That you could defeat God if he decides to save us. And he will deliver us. We're confident that he's going to do this. He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. And then this, of course, this is the most powerful verse in the entire chapter. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Pause right there on the screen. Even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I said that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they represent this other way of life. Their abilities, their strength, their own plans and desires, they have laid those things down a long time ago. They are not living to try to achieve something or to try and fulfill their own dreams. They have laid aside their own dreams and they have taken up their own strength and offered it to God. And this is their regular, established way of life. What I have, I'll use it to serve my God. In any situation. What was their deepest desire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? To go home. As teenagers, they were abducted from their home. Their home city was later burned to the ground, and most of their relatives and friends were massacred. Their greatest desire was to go back and be with their people, no doubt, to go home. They never got to go home. But they still lived like this. The best thing that I can do in my life is to serve my God wherever he has placed me. Even if I don't get what I want, that's okay. There's no particular reason why I should get what I want. Life is not about me. And because of that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are free. They are walking in the light. They are full of confidence. In this particular situation, they are pretty confident. They are confident that God is going to deliver them because that's what seems to make sense in the situation. It seems to them that their God, what they know of him, that he would want to deliver them from this outrageous thing that the king is doing. But they also recognize they're not in control of God. God might do something that they don't understand. And even if he does, they're still going to follow him, no matter what. The second point you can write down for today is this: serve God and leave the outcome in his hands. This is a huge secret to life that the Bible is trying to get across to us. If you make this the center of your life, I'm going to serve God. Okay, I'm at work. What am I supposed to do here? Work really hard, please my boss. Work really hard, advance, advance, advance. No, 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 no. Do my very best because God allowed me to have this job and be here. Do my very best for Him, not just for my boss or so that I can achieve something. Do my very best for God, but I can't control the outcome. If I don't get promoted, if I lose my job, if people don't respond to me the way I want, that's okay. I'm serving God anyway. I know what He's asked me to do, that's what I do. At school, same thing. At home, in my family, oh, my family's not going the way I want. Oh, red flag. I serve God in my family. I lay down my life for my wife, for my children, whatever your position is, for others in your family. I lay down my life to serve them because that's what God has called me to do. It doesn't matter in particular how they respond. It matters how I respond to God and His calling on my life. If you do this, your life will be full of life and light and peace and joy. If you do this, you are following the way that we see in Daniel and in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you do this, you will become more and more like Christ. If you live for the hammer, your life will eventually be shattered. It will fall apart. Last section we're going to read today, and then we'll wrap up and continue on in some worship today. Can I have the last section from Daniel? Oh, I see. Yeah. One second. Sorry, I confused myself here. Yeah, Daniel 19 to 25. Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar, furious with rage, he was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. He's kind of ridiculous, isn't he? Make it 7 times. It's already hot enough to kill them. Make it 7 times hotter. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. He's got to get the strongest soldiers so that the knots can be fully tight. Injure them before they throw them in. And so these soldiers don't die when they go up to the blazing furnace, but they do anyway. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and others' clothes, were bound and thrown into a blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent that the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The soldiers who carry them and throw them in die. You can see how everyone was terrified of Nebuchadnezzar. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Absolutely, Your Majesty." "Look," he said, "I see 4 men walking around in the fire. They are unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are walking in the fire. I don't know if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I don't know if they see this other person who's with them in the fire. And it's a little hard. There's debates about exactly, is this an angel? Is this Jesus before He came to earth? None of that's that important. This is God with them. God is with them in the fire. I'm not sure if they see the 4th person, but Nebuchadnezzar does. Nebuchadnezzar sees that not only are they unharmed, but there's somebody else with them. The fire reveals the reality. Remember, this book is an apocalypse. It reveals what's hidden. What's hidden is that all the time, not just in the fire, but all the time, God was with these 3 young men. And when the fire comes, when the incredibly difficult situation arrives, it reveals what was already there. It reveals it. Here's our last points that you can walk away with, write down for today. It's better to be with God than to get what you want. What do you think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember, they never got the thing that they wanted on this earth the most, or at least when they were young that they had wanted the most. They never got it their whole lives. But how do they feel when they're in the fire? It doesn't even matter anymore that I wanted to go home. Yeah, that was the thing that in my flesh I wanted more deeply than anything else, but now I'm in the middle of a blazing furnace and it can't touch me. And I feel the God who created the universe with me. There is nothing better than that. This is the meaning of life right here. They experience it. It's better to be with God than to get what you want. And next, our last point that you can write down, if you live for God, He promises to be with you. Think about that promise for a moment. If you will lay aside the hammer, your own plans, your own desires, your own ability to make things happen the way you want, if you will lay that aside, if you will offer it to God every morning when you get up, every day when you're at work or at school, if you will offer it to Him, He makes a promise to you because of Jesus. Because Jesus died for us, God promises that if you decide to live for Him at that deepest level, He will be with you in every situation. We're going to close just by reading the final verses of chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. Imagine this scene. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes weren't even scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said this, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and rescued His servants. They trusted in Him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble." He hasn't changed still. For no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. To be continued. Let's pray. Lord God,